There are moments in life that cleave your history into a before and an after. For a man named Arthur, a 68-year-old retired chef from Portland, Oregon, that moment arrived on a rainy Tuesday night in his son's kitchen. The air was thick with the aroma of a beef stew he'd been tending for hours, the same recipe his late wife Eleanor used to make. It was his love language, the only way he knew how to reach his son, Michael, anymore. The kitchen was warm, a stark contrast to the cold drizzle tapping against the window. Arthur had chopped the carrots into perfect coins, browned the chuck roast until it was fork tender, and seasoned it just the way Eleanor had taught him. He wasn't just making dinner. He was weaving a memory, hoping the familiar scent would bridge the growing gap between him and his family. "Sounds good in here, Dad." Michael's voice drifted in from the dining room, but it was thin, distracted. Arthur glanced over to see his son, the CEO of the restaurant chain Arthur had built from the ground up, scrolling through his phone, barely looking at the table Arthur was setting. His wife, Jessica, heavily pregnant with their first child, waddled into the room. 7 months along, her hand rested on her swollen belly. This was Arthur's first grandchild, a thought that usually filled him with joy. Tonight, it felt different. "Is this bread gluten-free, Arthur?" she asked, eyeing the fresh sourdough loaf like it was a problem. No, just regular from the bakery on. I can't have that." She sat down with a heavy sigh, pushing the bread plate away. "Michael, didn't you tell him about my restrictions?" Michael finally looked up, a flicker of annoyance on his face. "Dad, we talked about this. You know she's on a new diet." Arthur stood there, a hot pad in his hand, feeling like a stranger in the house he'd helped his son buy. "I don't remember that conversation, son. But it's fine. I'll make you some rice, Jessica." He turned back to the stove, the silence in the dining room pressing against his back like a physical weight. Since Eleanor passed 3 years ago, Arthur had moved in with Michael and Jessica. It was meant to be a comfort for them all, a way for Arthur to stay busy and help with the new baby. Lately, it felt more like he was renting space in his own son's life. After dinner, the bomb dropped. Michael called him into the living room, his expression unreadable. Jessica sat on the couch, her hands folded over her belly. "Dad, we need to talk about the baby's room," Michael began, not meeting his father's eyes. "The nursery?" Arthur asked, confused. "I thought you were using the spare room down the hall." Jessica spoke, her voice calm and decisive. "It's too small, Arthur. The baby needs space for a crib, a changing table, a glider. Your room is the biggest. It has the best light and the most closet space." The words didn't register at first. Arthur blinked. "My room? Where would I go?" Michael cleared his throat, his gaze fixed on the floor. "We've been thinking, Dad. This isn't working. You being here, it's too much." "Too much?" Arthur's voice was a whisper. "I cook for you. I clean. I stay out of your way. I paid for half the groceries this month. What's too much about that?" Finally, Michael looked up. His eyes, once full of admiration for his father, were now hard, almost cold. "You're a burden, Dad. We're about to have a baby. We need space. We need privacy. We need you to leave." The world tilted on its axis. Arthur gripped the back of a chair. "Leave? This is my home. I helped you buy this house." "It's our home," Jessica corrected sharply. "And we own it. We've been generous letting you stay here rent-free for 3 years, but it's time." Arthur looked at his son, the boy he'd taught to throw a curveball, to drive a stick shift, to make Eleanor's beef stew after she passed because it made him feel close to her. That boy was gone. In his place sat a stranger, a man who saw his own father as an obstacle. "Michael, please," Arthur begged, his voice cracking. Without a word, Michael walked to the counter, pulled out his wallet, and counted out 5 $100 bills. He laid them on the coffee table. "Find a motel, get an apartment, I don't care. Just be gone by morning." "Morning?" Arthur stared at the money. That's not even 12 hours. We need your room for the baby, Jessica said, without a trace of remorse. Arthur sat there, looking at the $500. It was the final valuation of 35 years of fatherhood, of sleepless nights, of building a business from nothing to hand over to his son. It was a severance package for a life he'd devoted to his family. He picked up the bills, folded them with shaking hands, and walked to his room. The room that would be a nursery in a week. He pulled out the 2 old suitcases he and Eleanor had bought for their honeymoon to the California coast 40 years ago. He packed his clothes, a few well-worn books, a framed photo. Tomorrow. Just one meal, he said. She looked up, skeptical. We have volunteers for that, Arthur. I know, and they're doing their best. But I'm a chef. I've been doing this for over 40 years. I can make a decent meal with what you have. I promise. She studied him for a long moment, her eyes sharp but not unkind. One meal. Breakfast tomorrow. Don't waste my food. That night, he couldn't sleep. At midnight, he went down to the kitchen and took inventory. Canned beans, day-old bread, onions starting to sprout, a bag of brown rice, some wilted vegetables. It wasn't much, but it was enough. By 5 a.m., he was in his element. He chopped, he seasoned, he simmered. He turned canned beans and rice into a savory, aromatic dish. He caramelized the onions until they were sweet and brown. He treated those humble ingredients with the same respect he'd once given a prime cut of beef. When the men lined up, they were met with a genuine good morning and a plate of food that smelled like a home they'd almost forgotten. The first man to take a bite, a weathered man named Frank with a faded Marine Corps tattoo, stopped chewing. He stared at his plate, and then silent tears rolled down his face. It tastes like my mother used to make, he whispered. Another man, younger, with track marks on his arms, just nodded at Arthur through the serving window, his eyes wet, and kept eating as if the food might disappear. Sister Margaret appeared beside him. What did you do, Arthur? He shrugged, overwhelmed by the reaction. I just cooked breakfast, sister. No. She shook her head, watching the men eat with a reverence she hadn't seen in years. You gave them their dignity back. For 42 years, Arthur had cooked for profit. In one morning, closure of 4 of their 6 locations, devastating health code violations, mounting lawsuits, and a debt load of over $2 million. The comments from customers were brutal. This place used to be amazing. Now it's a health hazard. The owner should be ashamed. Arthur stared at the screen. His son was destroying everything he had built. Not just the buildings, but the reputation, the relationships with staff and suppliers he'd cultivated for decades. He felt a cold fury he hadn't known he possessed. Thomas, now a close friend and mentor, was in his office the next day when Arthur showed him the article. I can find out everything, Thomas said quietly. The full extent of the debt, the legal trouble. But I need to know, Arthur. Are you ready to face him? Arthur thought of the rain, the $500, the cold dismissal. He thought of Frank and David and Marcus, men who'd been given a second chance. And he thought of the legacy Michael was burning to the ground. Yes, he said. Find out everything. A month later, the information was on the table. $2.3 million in debt. The bank was 90 days from foreclosure on his son's house. The only way to save it would be for someone to buy the debt from the bank. Arthur looked at Thomas. Can we do that? Thomas smiled, a slow, calculating smile. We're about to find out. With the help of learning to dice an onion properly or work a station during a Friday night rush. It was about how he treated people. Arthur would see Michael patiently teaching a new hire from the shelter how to fillet a fish, using the same encouraging words Arthur had once used with him. He saw him stay late to help clean up, not because he was asked, but because it needed to be done. He saw him with the other staff, no longer the boss, but a peer. He joked with Frank, listened to David's stories about building bridges, and quietly helped Marcus when he could see the young man was struggling with his sobriety. Michael was becoming one of them. 6 months into his sentence, a test arrived in the form of an old business associate, a slick developer named Chad, who wanted to poach Michael for a new high-end project. It was a tempting offer. A big salary, a prestigious title, a chance to be in charge again. Arthur watched from across the street as they met in a coffee shop. He saw Chad slide papers across the table. He saw Michael pick them up, read them, and then slowly shake his head. He watched Chad's face turn red with anger as Michael stood up, offered a handshake, and walked away without